lockdown for a few months, mount some events, then suddenly have to go back into lockdown. If actually they've made some provision where they've got some digital infrastructure and some, even if it's a basic but meaningful digital offer to audiences, maybe they can continue. So I think considering the two things hand in hand, regardless of what happens, is kind of fundamentally important for the future, and obviously for audience development. A couple of ancillary kind of conversations in the UK are around whether, in the UK there's a fairly developed sort of audience development kind of system. And lots of people are thinking, should we really be targeting younger audiences more, because they are the people that we need the confidence to come into the venues, really. So should there be more emphasis on encouraging sort of events that will attract younger people? So, maybe a few years down the line, when there are things like vaccines in place, and as Ravi said, maybe it'll be 5 years, 10 years before something's normal again. By that time, maybe these kids will be the adults that we want to get into the venues. So there are all these other kind of strategies, conversations going on to different degrees around the core issues, the core practical issues. And I think that's where people will succeed. It's by considering the audiences first, in a way, rather than necessarily the issues around the infrastructure. Obviously, they have to consider those, but they need to be adapted. So that's where I think we go. And the last thing I'll say is, I think one of the things that's been missing a fair bit, certainly in the UK context so far, is in terms of content. People have been scrabbling around looking for things that are actually available straight away in terms of performances that can be live streamed or, pre-recorded work to present as content. There's not been a lot of consideration, but understandably not a lot of resource around creating new collaborations specifically for a digital space with the artists. So again, changing the dynamic in the way that you're engaging with the artists that you put in your festivals.
Yeah.
So it's not about buying something off the shelf, it's making something new with them, and maybe that can be made in a more sustainable way, where again, the work is made where social distancing and other requirements are inherent in the processes, in the way that, as far as I understand it, that'll be the programme for the Greenwich and Dockland International Festival.
Thanks for that, Andrew. And I just want to bring up something, from what Tess said and a little bit about what Sushla said. I think the struggle here is also being able to think of what a festival in this time could look like, right? And I think a lot of us in India are just struggling with what Ravi was also saying, the changing goalposts and the constantly changing guidelines that are coming in, cases going up and down. How do you even imagine what a new kind of festival would look like? But I would encourage all of you to use the next 30 minutes or so to think about that, because this becomes that safe space for you to imagine. Don't think about the barriers, but let's think about, if we had to do a festival, if money was no challenge, what are the things that you would consider as the first question? What are the 3 most important aspects that you would implement in your festival? Is it possible to go low overall numbers? Do you think that's possible for you? For instance, Tess, yours is an open air festival, right? But Vaishali, yours is a literature festival. Anjum, yours is a literature festival. In your context, you tend to do it in auditoriums. So how would you look at what would be the most important aspects for your festivals? You don't have to agree to doing it after this, but if you could just share and think about it, I think that will help us also frame what this could be like. Yes, go ahead, Vaishali.
Yeah, so we've been looking at basically what Andrew mentioned, which is rather than going for pre-recorded performances or streaming live, we've been looking at, we were already part of a collaboration, and we've been trying to build work that keeps in mind the existing environment. So for example, definitely we're not planning to do anything in an indoor venue for at least the next 6 months, I think. So we're looking at outdoor spaces. We're looking at basically how we can create, again, the thing that, Andrew, you brought up about the hybrid performance. The problem is, yeah, we're looking at cultivating younger audiences as well, but we are a children's festival. So it's really challenging to try and even think about convincing parents to bring children into an environment which feels extremely high risk. And in terms of encouraging them to go online, they're already online all day with school and other things. So there's an overexposure of screen time. So finding that balance of what works. And I appreciate the fact that we should be surveying more. But as a festival, as opposed to kind of a school, we're not in touch with necessarily all our audiences. Yeah. And that's something that, from interactions like this, I'm also trying to take on board and try and find out, what would influence your decision to bring a child to a performance?
Sure. I think, again, this is an area where, consulting directly with, artists about creative processes, again, is really, really helpful. I mean, to give you one example, again, maybe I can send through a link at some point. There's an artist in the UK called Andy Field. He's a theatre maker, independent, works on the small scale. For anyone that's been to the Edinburgh Fringe, he used to run an organisation called Forest Fringe there. It was like an alternative to the Fringe Festival. Anyway, he's been doing quite a lot of work over the last few years with kids, collaborative projects, work with kids, doing things like reimagining the way cities look, things like this. He made a project which was working with, I think maybe 9 or 10-year-olds in a school context where they produced a news program. And the news program was actually talking about social issues from the kids' perspective around things like homelessness, gender, whatever it might be, some of the socio-politics of the day, right? And the kids are the presenters, the camera people, the reporters, the researchers. They do all of the work, and they actually physically produce a TV show. In its original format, there was a live presentation. They did the TV show live on a stage in a school. But attached to that, there was a stream. There was actually the TV program was shown with very kind of low-tech, technology to run it. He has now adapted that to make an entirely online version in COVID, and he's done that really easily and without a huge amount of resource. And suddenly he's got this product which is kind of like gold dust, and so in a British Council context, we have really got to, as best we can, got our ears to the ground, trying to identify where these artists have responded creatively like that. And people like Andy are in really, really high demand, because they can come up with, very quick and easy creative responses. And I think talking to the sector in that way is fundamentally important. And again, excuse my ignorance of the setup in an Indian context, but in the UK, it's like something like 70% more of the entire cultural sector is freelance. Most of the artists are freelance, even though, the artists that work in productions run by building-based companies, they still tend to be freelance performers or freelance technicians. And working in this way, collaborating with those artists, obviously directly supports people who may be struggling to sustain themselves otherwise with the freelance sector. So I think as a more holistic approach can be taken in a way, to the way that the end products, so to speak, are realized.
Yeah. And Andrew, just picking up on the collaboration point, Martin, I'll just come to you in a second because it's actually relevant to what both you and Vaishali were sharing in terms of working with children, right? Where your audience is, how do you train them? How do you change their behavior or even understand what their behavior might be like? And there are challenges there, but just picking up from the collaboration point, while we are hesitating to figure out how can we create that kind of similar experience in the pre-COVID time with all of these, what are the possible collaborations that we can look at? What are the partnerships that we can strike that could help us reframe if we can't do it by ourselves? So I'm just going to leave that as a thought here for us to also perhaps think about, maybe not necessarily from the cultural space, but as Andrew was mentioning, some freelancers, some artists who have done similar work or somewhat in that space that you could work with to create these structures and ways of working. Over to you, Martin.
Yeah, I have a similar problem that Vaishali faces. I have a clown festival where we have clowns coming from all over the world to India to perform, and our theaters are packed with parents and kids. And this is going to be really challenging to get parents and children together at one place. I really don't expect them to come. We generally have this festival in the month of October or December, but it looks to be very scary at this point of time to get kids together. Trying the online scenario, I did do a couple of things online, but yes, the parents have given me feedback that the kids are really tired of looking at the screen 24/7, and it's very difficult to keep them glued to a performance or a show. That's being one part of it. The second part of it, of course, we did generate a lot of revenue from ticket sales, and I don't see anyone willing to pay anything for an online performance while they're watching it. So these two things are really fearful for a long time. Yes, the entertainers from all over the world, they can perform online. They have been coming on Zoom and performing solo. The group travel is going to be tough, but then these are challenges that I'm really forcing, and I finding it difficult to grapple with it.
Yeah, I think again, we're all kind of making things up as we're going along here. Really, it's all by by trial and error. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with this Greenwich Festival next month because of the way that they have put into the creative process these kind of protocols again around social distancing already with the makers and the way that they're considering working with the audiences. So normally the Greenwich and Docklands Festival, a lot of the events, well, it's all open air, but a lot of the events are free. They've had to, some of the stuff they're doing is just ticket in the free events. So they will control the audience numbers regardless through ticketing. So people will need to go onto the website and reserve a place. Obviously, the way that they're going to set up the spaces, they will be, I doubt it'll look exactly like the slung low example I showed you with the little tents and on the presentation, but they are clearly going to be delineating spaces, clearly marking routes for people in and out. And in many cases, I think certainly with our outdoor performances, they tend to be short. And in that particular context, quite often the artists involved would already be contracted to maybe do 2 or 3 performances a day, So I think, again, they're looking at how they can increase the multiples of performances in order to make up the numbers, in small increments rather than the larger group. So they're just having to work these things out at the moment. But I think, again, a lot of the way that they've made that work is in collaboration with the artists, really considering the sites, leaving the artists to consider how they could creatively respond to the sites, and then making sure that they've been making the work in isolation. So again, I think this stuff around pods, it's a different way of working, and obviously it's got economic implications again. But I think the notions of making a piece in collaboration with if it is with clowns or other performers, but then being kind of effectively in the city, kind of in or on the site for what's effectively a quarantine period. So they work in a pod for a week or a fortnight or whatever the guidelines are, and then they can present their work in an open air context in front of an audience because they are safe. It's making reassurances like that and reconsidering the dynamic of the relationship between you as festival presenters and the people who are providing the end product.
Yeah. So Andrew, just to pick up on that, I don't know if you know, but there is one organization in India, I'm not sure if I'm at liberty to name it, but they are looking at a socially distanced festival for a much smaller number in December, where they have raised the ticket prices quite a bit. And this is where I'd like to, Pratik, if you don't mind me calling out on you, to perhaps share, coming from your perspective, right? You are in the business of looking at creating festivals from just a structure point of view. And what both Martin and Vaishali and everybody have been talking about is how do you, it's ticketing and monies is also a big thing in this country because we do not have the kind of grants that we would have, say, for instance, with the Arts Council in England or in Scotland. But for us, what is the middle way where we can, how do we tell the audience that we want you to come and filter the audience? And what role does ticketing or thinking about closing those experiences for a specific number of people who for the moment can afford it? So if you can just give us a sense of where you are coming from and what your thoughts are on this.
So, hello. We're trying to do this one festival like NS7 back. We're trying to see how to make it digital. Obviously, we are trying to figure out what is the ticketing model and what is the revenue model towards it. Going live with this is not feasible with social distancing because we generally have a crowd capacity of 30,000 over 3 days, and that's the ticketing. That's a bigger chunk of ticketing revenue. But now that we have to come down to like a substantial number of like total of 10,000 in 3 days, it sounds really weird because your ticketing revenue is come down 2/3. So it is not ideal right now. We are trying to mix both the things right now, but it is still a very far-fetched thing to, sort of try and make sense of the revenue at this point because it's not feasible. Like the ticketing cost is just 3 times. So if I'm buying a ticket for 4,000 bucks, I might have to buy a ticket for 12,000 rupees. I might have to buy a ticket for 12,000 bucks to attend a 3-day festival. If I have to just do a normal math, but that as a person or as a consumer is not going to pay so much towards a festival. So that is something which is on where we're trying to meet digital and do live together and try and make a hybrid scene out of it.
Pratik, and actually it's quite similar, Andrew, as you were saying, is that and what Tess was also earlier speaking of, Vaishali and Martin, that there is a sense of, I'm not sure how to proceed from here because our traditional audience has other challenges, whether it's young audiences or in the case of, youth. And what they came for to your festival, what's the USP of your festival. But as Andrew was also saying, that within this there is the space for opportunity, and the opportunity being audience development, like the number of audiences you can now reach. Go ahead, Vaishali.
So actually, that's what something I wanted to say when Martin was speaking, that one of the things we've been exploring is looking at freelance artists anywhere in the world. Like you said, clowns are coming from everywhere. So if you collaborate with them and try and set up like a stream for a performance, but then also build a database of that the audience member can then subscribe to. So maybe they don't pay for the streamed event, but they pay to access like a monthly subscription. And that's something that we've been thinking about, but haven't really implemented yet. But we've been talking to, the people that we are networked with who are also in isolation or in quarantine or wherever in the world. And definitely in terms of opening up to collaborating on a larger scale, that's something that has happened and is a huge opportunity now. Almost for, both festivals and for artists, for their work to reach, larger numbers. So that's, I don't know if Martin, definitely I want to stay in touch with Martin and
sure.
Some of his clowns to get on.
But I have a question, if I may just butt in a question. This is again my experience from the last 2 or 3 months that I've been trying to do things live. A performance by a clown or a circus artist is very live. Everything happens live on stage, which is so much full of action. But when people see it on a screen, they're expecting a much different and sleeker version. So all the errors and the pitfalls that happen is really noticed broadly. So I've been told that, okay, you don't go live, you do it pre-recorded. And when you try to do it pre-recorded, the essence of going live is lost. And then you need a bigger production value to do a pre-recorded. You can't do a pre-recorded with just one camera. You can go live with one camera. So there's a chicken and an egg scenario, which I'm not able to figure out. I wish someone could throw some light on it.
Martin, what will be excellent is also for that, you should check out one of our previous sessions that we have done, which exactly answers that question. And I also like that we're gently moving into revenue models. Let's try and bring it back to socially distanced festival. I know it's really, really tempting. I've touched upon that as a food for thought, but we should use this time to, especially with Andrew and what he's presented around socially distanced festivals, and try and get that focus in. Yeah, over to you.
I think there's a correlation again though, because if you think about audience behavior, which part of your audience will be prepared to pay for something and which won't, and it's about targeting them differently. Again, it's slightly tangential, and this is with a relatively well-funded organization, but it's a theatre again, the Old Vic in London, so very traditional in a sense theatre, presenting quite conservative work to a very conservative middle class and upper audience typically. They've started doing socially distanced performances in the venue, which they've been live streaming, and they have good infrastructure to do that. So the production values are relatively high, okay? But what they've been able to do because of their kind of, funding trustee model, whatever it is actually sell tickets for the online stream in the way they would sell seats. So they've only sold the same number of, passes to the live stream as there are seats in the venue. And in that way, they've been able to sort of drive the revenue up because it's kind of exclusive, So that's one model, but I think for a lot of people, again, at the moment, it's very difficult to understand. But I think it's about a balance between looking at things where you can create some sort of income and in a different way where you can effectively give away things free, and be more magnanimous, because that will help you reach other audiences that are going to be your audience of the future, So it's a kind of a, it's being as strategic as possible about making those decisions. But I entirely understand what Martin's talking about the live experience being radically different to any kind of any version filtered through a screen. So I don't think there's any notion in the UK, that, the future will be entirely digital. That's the last thing that people want. And I think, again, it's too early to predict this, but I suspect that, obviously technology may get cheaper, easier to use, as we move on, more available. Obviously everyone's using Zoom now, where a couple of years ago, very few people knew about it. We were using it, but, but that's become a norm, isn't it? And this way of meeting has become a norm. And the picture quality is not so good, but that's become a norm. And I suspect, in the way that we were all using Facebook, and everyone's, I don't understand any of these things, but people have flipped to Instagram or to WhatsApp, whatever. Things become norms, and I think if we're approaching younger audiences again, then for them potentially, production values are not necessarily going to be kind of top of the agenda. And if they're used to seeing images in a rough and ready way, and they aren't going to be the ones that are going to be fussy about it being a bit blurry or whatever, attract them rather than the ones that are going to be fussy. And you can't make the fussy ones pay for an experience that's not high quality and doesn't look like the NT live streams, the National Theatre. So I think it's about retargeting and considering your audiences in slightly different ways, and with that in mind, considering where the makers fit in relation to that conversation.
Yeah, I will send you also a link to the previous session that we'd done on revenue models and new models of working, where we had actually covered this extensively, including breaking down what content looks like. But keeping it back to the focus of this session, I know there are a couple of other people here who haven't spoken yet. Anjum, Janvi, Srijata, Karan, Gaurav, anybody would like to share thoughts, concerns, please feel free to do so. Anjum, you're on mute. Anjum, you're on mute.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was saying that I'm really here to listen and get ideas, because the festival that I was working with is fairly new, and it was very much premised on the location, which was Shantiniketan. And so this is going to be something that I have to figure out, that maybe one now re-looks at the essence of what Shantiniketan stands for and what it is, and instead of actually that becoming the physical location, maybe we shift to it become more a symbolic or a conceptual idea. So these are things that I'm trying to think about, apart from the fact of how do you, because I can't see people actually traveling to go to a destination festival happening very soon. Even in a large city, people may take the risk to go to an outdoor venue if it's just a short drive away or a walk away or something. But if you have a festival that's in a place that's out of town and where people have to make the effort to go, I think that might be a little bit of a challenge. So I'm just listening to everybody and trying to take some of these ideas back.
Things like that, again, I think, that, as I said, looking at this Greenwich and Docklands Festival and how that pans out could be quite interesting. Again, as I said, in the presentation, there's a link to that on the last page.
Okay.
and that survey that I mentioned. But I think again, considering things like pop-up venues in small spaces will be very, very helpful, and considering local performances where people don't need to take public transport.
Right. Yes. Thank
So
you.
I've noticed we're closed. I was trying to be really quick there because the breakout room's closing, isn't it? I don't know if it made any sense.
No, that was perfectly fine. Thank you so much for that, Andrew. I know some of us are leaving to go back to the main session, but you're absolutely right. Driving distance is something to need to consider. And what Andrew was saying, just rethinking your target group accordingly. And it also opens up, right? Like the digital world is world over, but your physical
That's
space
right.
may have to look at who can travel to your place. They may not be able to fly into your festival. So it's just retargeting that and then creating safe experiences alongside. I think the next group will have an interesting compilation because they were looking at partnerships with tourism companies and the government